Tonight on Headline Humboldt, we do a deep dive with outgoing Eureka Police Chief Steve Watson, examining his career, his tenure as chief, and the difficulties facing cops as they strive to keep the peace. Also, Humboldt County, like the rest of the country, is shuffling the political deck by redrawing districts and honoring the ethics of fair play. Or are they? Coming up next. Live from the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. When it comes to policing, there's no shortage of opinions. This is as it should be in a free society where manhandling folks into the back of a squad car should be among the last resorts in resolving civil conflict. You hear some people argue that we should do away with police departments altogether in favor of public safety agencies that represent more of an amalgamation of social work, crisis counseling, and some reduced measure of actual enforcement. Yet in many cities, that evolution is already occurring, and further restrictions risk undermining the ability of police to do their jobs. On the other end of the spectrum, folks will argue that any criticism aimed at police is destructive to law and order. They argue that existing accountability measures are sufficient, if not already over the top, and that we need to be cognizant of the risk officers face every day when we pass judgment on their actions. What gets missed in the back and forth is how both sides of this debate contribute equally to our civic health. Would you want to live in a society where there was no legal accountability for the victimization of others? Where the state didn't have enough power to train or equip sufficient numbers of police to prevent chaos and violence in the streets? Or would you want to live in an authoritarian state where the actions of police were above reproach, always? Where in every questionable case the officer was given the benefit of the doubt, even when evidence, such as a graphic video and testimony, proved they were at fault? The sweet spot is right where we are. Does law enforcement deserve scrutiny? Always. Otherwise, they'll become corrupted. Should we recognize the frailty and humanity of our police and understand that the best people can and will make mistakes? Always, or we'll never recruit good people to do this most difficult work. In a free society, the moral high ground lies right in the contested middle, the one place where we can be sure that critical questions get asked of both sides and everybody. Tonight for the interview, we sat down with outgoing Eureka Police Chief Steve Watson, who recently announced his retirement. We spoke of his work, his department, and all the complexities that go into managing police in the 21st century. Thanks for joining us, Headline Humboldt. Today in the studio, we have Chief Steve Watson from the Eureka Police Department, who recently announced his retirement from the Eureka Police Department. Thanks for coming into the studios and meeting with us.
Well, thanks for having me, James.
Yeah, no problem.
It's always a pleasure.
So, I've been a long-time journalist in Humboldt County, and I've been an observer of Eureka Police Department, both from the back of a squad car and, press conferences. I'm pretty intimately aware. And it seems like your tenure as a police chief has been one of a lot of progressive reforms, and we can talk a little bit about some of what you try to do. But in terms of especially dealing with the homeless and the drug addicted, it seems like you were more of an inclusive chief than had been so in the past. My question is, which of those reforms are you most proud of, and how confident are you that when you retire, those would last into the future?
Well, that's quite a loaded question
right
there. Let me start with the second part. I believe that the city is committed to finding a chief that will continue to move the department forward progressively. We live in an era right now with increasing and evolving demands on the police by society, sometimes even impossible demands, quite frankly. But it requires a department and a head of a department that is able to deftly navigate those changes, with some agility and flexibility, because they're constantly evolving and evolving very quickly. We police with the consent of those in our community that give us that authority. And so it's important that we understand and respect the expectations of that community, while at the same time, there are things about the job, obviously, that the average person doesn't fully understand unless you've walked in an officer's shoes. But trying to strike that balance is very important. And so I'm hopeful that we'll get a fantastic chief, whoever he or she may be, and I'll be sitting back eagerly watching with the rest of you on that ride. It's hard to let go when you've invested so much of yourself into something like an organization as amazing as Eureka Police Department, and it's an organization still in the midst of change. It's all about continual improvement, and I hope that that's a culture that we've started at EPD. It's certainly one that I've striven to instill. So that community customer service oriented mindset, building on relationships with the community. Community policing is all about relationships and partnerships, and we can never lose sight of that. And also accountability and transparency for our actions. And the community deserves that from us. In terms of, I guess we'll say, reform or culture change, I believe the strides that we've made, we've really pivoted in 2017, 2018 with how we respond to the homeless. We recognize that enforcement can't be the first and only tool that we reach for on our belt, that we really need to think about relationships, important partnerships and connections in the community, not only with the homeless themselves, but also nonprofits, faith-based agencies, our public partners, to kind of have a whole community work together on this issue, because policing is a shared responsibility, and we're not the homeless police, and we don't want to be. So the Community Safety Engagement Team, or CSET, has really been at the forefront of the department's efforts to reimagine, if you want to use that phrase, it's being tossed around a lot these days, how we respond to homelessness, addiction, and mental illness. And I call those three the tragic triad, because they're so interconnected and synergistic in a very destructive way. And then Uplift Eureka, the city's program, where we have co-pilots and caseworkers working with the homeless, teaching job skills training, and how to make appointments and get a job, get the IDs and paperwork you need so you can even get housing or a job. And so I think that's been a great improvement, one of many. I could go on. I mean, there's de-escalation training and embedding that into our culture and seeing visible success of that change. There's a stark example of a video from an agency south of us and how they handled a naked mentally ill man that ended up resulting in significant use of force by multiple officers. Our officers encountered the exact same situation about a month apart, and were able to quickly take him into custody with minimal use of force. And so very proud of that progress.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were to take sort of an outside global perspective on the department and what you've done there, is there anything that you would have tried differently from the start in terms of your approach, or do you think that you pretty much did the best you could with what you had at hand?
I think the short answer is the last statement that you just made, but of course, looking back, one can always see areas where we could do better. Or maybe I'd take a different approach, and it's hard for me right at the moment to immediately think of one of those examples, but I can say, reflecting back, of course, I've got some things that, if I knew what I knew today through my lived experience, then I might try a different tact on that, or maybe I would start something a little sooner.
Timing.
Timing's everything. But I do think we've made a lot of progress in a relatively short time, and we built upon the previous chief's work, and that's not to throw shade at all those that came before, because many people honorably served their community at EPD over the decades. But clearly, society began to change, needs and expectations. Chief Mills started as well on that progress, especially from a community engagement and public image perspective. I'd like to think that we've continued that, but we also really focused also on strengthening the core of EPD itself, because as you hire, who you hire and promote really determines your culture in a way that almost nothing else does. And I think we've made some great promotions overall and great hirings that are going to, people are going to reflect the values of the department and the community.
What's your history within the department? You became chief in 2017, right? But you've been with the department longer than that. Can you run through that real quick? 2005.
So I transferred back home. This is my home county, from the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office after nearly 8 years. Brought my growing family up here. EPD was hiring, so that's why I came, a direct hire in. I was an officer for about 2 years, became a sergeant in, I believe, 2007, September. Was tasked with forming and running our problem-oriented policing unit, or POP. I believe that was January of 2008. Served as a sergeant for several years, was promoted by Chief Mills to captain in November of 2014, and then I've been chief for a little over 4 years, full-time since then. I became interim chief in July of 2017 and the permanent chief in October.
Do you think, why retire now? Is it a function of it's just a high-pressure job and that you think it needs kind of that rotation every few years? Or, just what made you seek the door right now?
I think you answer a lot of my questions in
Well,
your.
I'm trying to.
But,
I talk too much.
Yeah, so it's difficult for me to dive into the complicated calculus that went into a large decision like that. Like any big decision, a lot of thought went into it. It wasn't easy to make. At the end, it was just clear that it was time, and I think there could be some benefits, depending on how recruitment goes. To you get a fresh perspective in. I believe we've laid a very strong foundation to position the department well for the future. And so, maybe that will end up being a positive thing, even though I know people fear change and, have some concerns that I'm leaving. I think it's a very understandable question, 5 weeks notice that I'm going to retire. Yeah. But it's not due to any one incident, and certainly not any kind of negative performance or incident or the texting investigations. Nothing to do with any of that. And you can dig deeper if you'd like. Yeah. But nothing to do with that at all. It's just a combination of the timing and realization that it's time to take a step back, reflect on nearly a quarter century of what I believe is a job well done and served honorably, and look forward to the next adventure. I've been asked by my wife and kids for about 2-3 years nonstop, when are you going to retire, spend more time with us? Yeah. And finally I get a step back and say, okay, now's your turn. Yeah. I'm not done. I don't know what's next. I have some ideas, but it'll be very different, I think, than, like you said, the pressures of being chief. Yeah. You only have so much emotional and mental bandwidth. Sure. And when you're chief, it's 24/7, 365, middle of the night, the call could come, or middle of the night and worrying about.
It could be middle of the night and there's, people dying, and it's not just come into the office, it's like it can be anything.
Right. So you bear the weight, what feels like the whole world, especially today. Chiefs are retiring and moving on for various reasons at an exponential rate right now. There's been some studies on that, much higher than previously. And it's probably a combination of so many different things. It creates its own.
Do we expect too much of chiefs? I mean, should there be, can we reimagine how that works so that one person doesn't bear all the responsibility for overseeing a department that's so huge and has so many complicated,
I think in some communities you've definitely seen overreactions where who would want to become chief there because one incident beyond their control occurs or something, and suddenly there's a political push to, well, we'll just cut the head off the organization.
Well, that's always the answer, right?
Right, and then what you get is somebody right at a point where maybe they understand the culture enough, they can really see change through. They're gone, and you start over at square one. And that's what I'm hoping doesn't happen here with this transition and the foundation that we've built. I've made it longer than many chiefs. The average today, I think, has dropped to something like 3 years. Wow. There wasn't an easy decision. I'm very mindful of the timing. It's been 2 years of nonstop crises, and I really wanted originally to wait until I felt like everything was unicorns and rainbows.
Of course.
I think it's going to be a little while, but we're making some progress. And again, it was clear to me that it's time to make that change.
Yeah. So you did answer my question. I was going to ask if the issue with the text messages related to MEFTA and Marina Sanchez had anything to do with it. You're saying it doesn't.
If anything, I would stay on longer to see that all the way through, but this thing has drug on for almost 8 months now.
Do you have any sense of when the investigation might wrap, or have you any inkling of what it might entail at this point?
Yes, that would be the short answer. I can't get into details, but the investigation itself is complete, and now the legal team is just going through the final report and some of the other steps that need to be taken in preparation for the decisions that will be made. Okay. Whether I'll be here for that part of it, we'll have to see how things progress over the next 30 days. Yeah. I'm hopeful, not
so
because...
So that's coming soon then?
Right. Okay. We hope, but we're both of us are hesitant to put a date because that date keeps getting pushed out.
Yeah, 2 more weeks.
Right. The good thing I can say is that I have reviewed that report in its entirety, and it's extremely thorough and comprehensive, and that's the end result that we need so we can make fair and appropriate decisions based on the totality of the evidence.
Absolutely.
That's there. And I can't speak to those decisions here. I just know that I would rather do my part to wrap this up, so to speak, and move forward with the outcomes than to put that on the shoulders of the next person that comes in. But it does have nothing to do with the investigation. That the results will show that there's no culpability on my part or senior leadership through that. And that's something that the city can be free to share. Maybe afterwards, they're going to have to make decisions on what they can release legally. But the evidence will show has nothing to do with the timing of my retirement. I'll just put it that way. Okay. And the city manager's been very clear on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Are they currently on duty, the two officers?
No, one lives in another state.
Okay.
And the other one is still on administrative leave pending the outcome.
Pending the outcome of the investigation. Right. Okay. You have ridden through the COVID pandemic. And one thing we've seen recently across the country is that for whatever reason, a lot of police unions seem to be against forcing their members to get vaccination shots. I think I recall we spoke a little bit about it before, and you weren't requiring that or weren't seeing that much resistance. But where does that stand? And I have a follow-up question about unions more generally, but where does vaccination stand with the department, and have you had any significant issues?
So we were sometime before the city and council elected to mandate vaccinations, we were in the mid-60s on the totality of our department. Higher a little bit than maybe the average I read that's out there. Like you spoke of, many policing and fire agencies have relatively low participation with vaccines compared to other sectors. And I'm sure people were right about why in the future. I'm not really sure. The city went to mandated testing, which we had some initial concerns, but everybody quickly jumped on board and complied. So we had no disciplinary issues or personnel issues with that. And then finally they transitioned to mandated vaccines for everyone that can't essentially offer one of two exemptions, medical or religious.
Sure.
That, and there's a process for those.
Yeah.
And so we were at 100% by the deadline of active police officers vaccinated, at least their first vaccination. And really, really close to that department-wide. We had a handful of exemption requests submitted, and that's it. I don't think I lost anybody that was a full-time employee over the vaccine mandate. And so I know it was difficult. A lot of people had some real concerns and issues with that. But the fact at the end of the day, they stepped up and they did it, really goes back to just the caliber of people that I believe we have working in the city of Eureka and the Eureka Police Department. And that's no knock on those that choose a different path, because I understand this is a highly personal issue that people really tie closely to their freedom over their bodies.
Yeah.
And I respect that. I understand that, even while I believe vaccines are important for community safety.
Yeah. I've heard that there has been some staffing issues with the department in terms of things like CSET. If it's not vaccinations, what is the culprit there, and what can we do as a city to make sure that we have enough officers on duty?
You need more than 5 minutes for this, because this is probably the number one. The recruitment and retention crisis it's been difficult for at least 10 years.
If we need to.
But it's accelerated in the last year. And the Sheriff's Office, Arcata PD, you've read about them. They're in the same boat we are, and there's agencies across the country struggling. I think it's like a confluence of events coming together. People were weary at a year and a half plus of the vaccine mandates, the summer of unrest and the calls to defund the police, and the hate speech. When I say hate speech, I'm not equating it equally to true hate speech, but the anti-police rhetoric. I mean, we had signs like, kill all pigs, and things that we were dealing with some of these protests. And I just think that, combined with more and more laws that have cops fearing that if they don't act 100% perfect, which is impossible, they're going to get prosecuted, has just created an environment where that negative national narrative has caused officers to step back, and maybe not be as proactive, and many to leave the profession. It's just been accumulation of stress. In an already difficult sector to recruit and retain. Yeah.
One of the things that we've seen as a result of again, the vaccination stuff, but also because of, like you're talking about, the sort of anti-police zeitgeist that we've seen a little bit of, is that police unions have become really powerful political forces, to the point where, to some outside observers, it almost looks like the unions dictate terms to the departments and to cities about how discipline can be handled, how basically whether or not police officers will agree to get vaccinated in other cities, that sort of thing. Do you think that that's out of balance right now? I mean, do you think that is it possible that the unions have too much power and that could change, or do you think it's where it needs to be?
I think that there are some examples where they have too much power, and as frustrated chiefs wanting to bring reform. I don't think that's holistically true. Like in the Eureka Police Department, yes, we have a union, they're active, they definitely have a voice, but that dynamic at that level is not in play.
Sure.
And the union, the association is largely chosen to try to work with the city constructively on different issues like negotiation for wages and whatnot. So I'd say it's a cautionary area in some cases, but at the same time, officers again have an impossible job with impossible expectations in an environment where it's tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving, and mistakes happen. But if it's misconduct, we will not condone that. You know, what you condone or you tolerate, you condone. But if it's an honest mistake and it's not one of those that crosses one of those bright lines, you know, they need to have some protections in place as well. It's important, or no one would do the job.
Yeah.
And they you know, society owes them that. That doesn't mean there's not accountability, corrective action, and all of that, but there needs to be a fair due process for the men and women we ask to do this difficult job. Quickly back to your other question, you know, the council and community needs to continue to show their officers that they appreciate them, they respect them, that they understand that we need them, and look for ways, big and small, constantly to show them that. Wages is always going to be a certain issue, and so it's important that those are fair for the area that we live in and very competitive, especially if you come to EPD. You're going to probably work twice as hard, literally, as any other agency with our volume.
Yeah.
But that's not the only thing. It's also how you feel that you're treated, how decisions are made, quality of life issues, and some of those things that it's important they align to. And we need to balance that with the fact that, again, expectations in society are also evolving, and policing is evolving, and we need to evolve. You know, not all the change that's taking place, much of it's good. Some of it goes way too far and is ridiculous, but there are things that have changed in the last year that are going to move our relationship with our communities forward.
Yeah. I mean, we only have a minute left, so I guess if there was any advice that you could give to your successor, and also to the city council and the city manager, Miles Slattery, about how to improve that relationship and make sure that everyone cooperates in a constructive way, what would you say?
Well, I'd repeat what I just told you.
Okay.
You know, I would say something I say to everybody, including my captains, which is it's not just the decisions that we make, but how we make them that matter, and how we communicate them.
Sure.
So that's important. And as much as you can have people be part of the process, you get more ownership. Continue to find ways to support them and show them that they're appreciated. And the final thing is walk in their shoes a little bit. Come out and do some ride-alongs, spend some real time, so that when you make these important decisions for the community and the department, you truly understand the unique perspective that the police officers and professional staff members and dispatchers are bringing. You know, and that may be very enlightening and cause a shift in some of the decisions or the timing and way in which they're at it.
Sure. Would you say that you've been treated fairly by the city?
I think, looking back as a whole, over the nearly 17 years that I've been here, I've had my ups and downs. I've had good leaders and bad leaders, but as a whole, I'm extremely grateful for the opportunities that I've been given here, even to be chief, and especially to be chief through this all. And so, yeah, I have no regrets looking back from that perspective.
Thanks again for joining us. That's all of our questions for tonight, and I appreciate your service to the city of Eureka.
And thanks for having me, James.
Big news on COVID this week. Vaccinations are now approved for children aged 5 to 11, and the county has surprisingly moved toward reducing mask requirements, even as some health metrics linger at troubling levels. Headline Humboldt's Ryan Hudson has more.
This coming Monday, Humboldt County will be dropping the public outdoor masking mandate entirely. This change in public COVID-19 prevention policy comes on the heels of the FDA's emergency use authorization of Pfizer vaccine for kids age 5 to 11, nearly 10,000 of whom are eligible in Humboldt County. Offering a pathway to complete masklessness in public, with the exception of places under state or federal masking rules, Humboldt County could be maskless by December if 3 conditions can be met before mid-January. These are hospital capacity levels, community immunity at a level of 80% by way of vaccination, and 3 weeks in the moderate or yellow tier, according to the CDC's data tracker website. Dr. Hoffman explained.
So number one is it will be lifting the outdoor masking requirement as of November 8th, next Monday. The second part is setting some metrics by which we will be monitoring going forward to lift the entire order and then revert to whatever state or other agencies are requiring for in terms of masking around the pandemic. The third area of that new order is an exception for groups who are 100% fully vaccinated, with certain conditions being met to allow for those settings to happen before the removal of the entire mask mandate. And all of this is really joining in other counties in our area and in Northern California. You know, the idea here is we want to clearly communicate to our community what we're watching. And so now we've experienced this Delta surge. We have a lot more data, we have a lot more evidence, we have a lot more knowledge of the virus. So we have been in the red tier consistently for months now. So, you know, we would probably, I mean, to get 21 days in the yellow tier, we're still a ways away. Of the counties who have adopted this type of metric, one of them has triggered it recently, and that's Marin County.
Even as county public health raised concerns about the high levels of COVID-19 in the Fortuna area putting certain zip codes on notice, Dr. Hoffman was optimistic. The health officer also noted that if Humboldt is unable to meet this mark by mid-January, other metrics would be discussed to move beyond masking. For Headline Humboldt, I'm Ryan Hudson.
A gerrymandering scheme that could have blocked progressive takeover of Humboldt County government fizzled out this week. Headline Humboldt's Eric Black explains.
Every 10 years, state law requires counties to redraw district boundaries for county supervisors. Virginia Bass, for example, represents most of Eureka. But at meetings of the Redistricting Advisory Committee last month, some stakeholders proposed transferring Eureka's Old Town and West Side neighborhoods to Arcata's district. They argued residents of the newly drawn district would share a common interest because they're largely renters. Enter Natalie Arroyo. She's already started campaigning for Bass's seat. But because the progressive Eureka City Council member lives near the flashing circle on the west side, the transfer scheme would exclude Arroyo from Eureka's district and prevent her from replacing Bass. Here's why that matters. The Board of Supervisors is arguably more conservative than their constituents. Mike Wilson and Steve Madrone are progressive. Michelle Bushnell reflects Southern Humboldt's libertarianism. Virginia Bass and Rex Bone are old guard traditionalists, if not quite conservative. They generally support the status quo. But look at the 2020 election results. Humboldt voters are at least liberal, if not progressive. If Arroyo replaces Bass, the board's new progressive majority would arguably better reflect the electorate's political leanings. At a hearing Tuesday, supervisors dismissed the gerrymandering scheme without even discussing it. That means Arroyo can run in the spring. Bass hasn't announced if she'll seek a fourth term. In the meantime, on Tuesday, new maps will post that largely keep current district lines intact. You can comment at the county's redistricting website. Supervisors could adopt the new boundaries November 16th. Eric Black, Headline Humboldt.